Very welcome to this seminar, which is held in the Society for the Swedish Society for Philosophical Practice, Svenska Sällskapet för Filosofisk Praxis. And this time we have invited Jose Barrientos, who will talk about philosophical practice in prisons. And before I turn to him, I just want to also introduce Tom, who is the treasurer for this society since many years, and also Celia, who used to be the chairman, but also an active member, and currently also on the board with me. And she will be helping out with the Q&As, questions and answers at the end of Jose's talk, because I will also have to leave actually. So again, this is Swedish Society for Philosophical Practice. We do philosophy in dialogue, and we try to push society, the Swedish society that is, to embrace and use philosophical practice within school as a part of healthcare, and also at public places such as libraries and other cultural institutions, in order to make Sweden a bit more, I guess you could say, wise and thoughtful, to enhance people's capacity for being in dialogue, which we think has both health benefits as well as democratic benefits. So please, very happy to have Pepe with us, and I think it's best that you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Tulsa, for inviting me here to share some ideas with your team and with your people in your country. And welcome to all of you, because for me it is very interesting that we can share some of the ideas that we have developed here in Spain for 21 years, and the work that we are developing in prisons, not just in Spain, but we are developing workshops in Argentina, Brazil, and other countries. So, as I said, thank you very much for the opportunity to Tulsa Jansson to share with you the ideas. And as she said, you can write down your question in the chat, or even you can make the question at the end of the lecture of my presentation. So, I am professor at the University of Seville, associate professor at the University of Seville, and I have been working in philosophical practice for 20 years. I started with philosophical counseling, but after some years, I decided to move to make philosophical workshops in several places, in libraries, schools, and the like. But at the end, since 2013, 2014, I decided to make workshops with people at social risk. And after that, we decided to make workshops in prisons. We have published several books. We have a journal on philosophical practice, ASER, the International Journal on Philosophical Practice, with articles in English and in Spanish. And you are invited to publish with us and even to read it, because it's open to all people in internet. And indeed, we started a master degree on philosophical practice at our university some years ago. And now I am moving on. I am developing another master's and postgraduate courses in Brazil, for example, in Portuguese, or in Colombia. We are going to open one in Colombia. But mainly, as I said, my main focus, my main work now is to work with people at social risk. Even I am going to talk with on our workshops in prison. I am going to share a presentation. If you want my presentation, I cannot share the presentation because I don't have the possibility to share. Thank you very much, Tulsa, for the link. And this is the presentation. As I said, if you are interested in presentation, I can send you by email, or even if you ask for me by social networks. You can look for me in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you look for Jose Barrientos Rastrojo. Okay, we have more or less, my idea is to expose in between 30 or 40 minutes. And after that, we can have a dialogue. And the outline of my presentation is to explain what is philosophical practice in general. There are many ways to do philosophical practice, but we have an open idea of philosophical practice that integrates philosophical it covers philosophical practice and workshops. After that, I am going to talk about the Boecio project, that is the project in prisons. I am going to talk a little about the past of that project, how we develop a session in general, in order you know what we are doing with inmates and detainees in prisons. After that, I am going to explore the 3 philosophical pillars of our projects: critical thinking, to rule over our passions, to govern our passions, and to train on communicative life and community. And after that, I am going to close with some ideas that we are opening now, like a center for philosophical practice for people at social risk. So, what is philosophical practice? Normally, when you think in a philosopher, you think in a person that explains some contents to a person or a group that explain, for example, the concept of freedom, the concept of love, the concept of, I don't know, a lot of truth to a student, and that student have to repeat those contents in an exam in order to pass his exam. And in general, this is the idea. So the student is very passive in this situation. But normally, a philosophical practitioner philosophical abilities, the general ability is critical thinking. So a lot of philosophical practitioners and a lot of philosophical counselors, what we do in their consultation is to work with their counselees, their problem, their issue, in order they explore, they resolve in some occasion. I don't like the word resolve, but they explore their problem, and they are going to have support of the philosophical practitioners because he's going to giving him some critical thinking abilities. And those abilities, those critical thinking abilities, are based on logic, rhetoric, dialectics, and in some authors like Aristotle, Descartes, a lot of people, a lot of philosophers in the history of philosophy. But we can develop more philosophical abilities, like, for example, such as to increase existential strength when dealing with problems. When we have a problem, we can develop resilience, as psychologists said. Stoicism develop this strength, this power to deal with, to face some grave problems, some severe problems in our life. And we can develop some philosophical workshops in order people are good in this resilience. But philosophical practice, some workshops can help us, for example, to train the wonder. There is a female philosopher, Rachel Carson, and she wrote the book, The Sense of Wonder. And if you read this book, you can see how she trained his nephew on wonder. So we have more abilities on philosophical practice, or even we can help people to train their understanding, how we can understand the other people, how we can understand culture, how we can understand society, institutions. And we have a lot of philosophers. I am not going to stop a lot in philosophers, but here you can see some philosophers, for example, Merleau-Ponty, Gadamer, Dilthey, Cassirer, Nishida, that develops different ways of understanding the other people or culture. Or even we can develop some philosophical abilities in order to see deeply without bias, like Edmundo Husserl make, or even to think not just by means of the ego, but by means of the of ourselves, of the idea of a community. And we can go to some Latin American philosophy, like the philosophy of Tojo Laval, that is a community in Mexico, and they have developed a philosophy based on the we, on the us, not on the I, but on the ego, but on the us. And they can think on that idea. So we can talk about more philosophy, but philosophical practice, as I said before, a philosophical practitioner is not going to give contents to a person. He's going to train persons or group in order they develop their contents, and they are going to improve their thinking by means of these methodologies. But the idea is not to give a lesson like I am doing now on philosophy, but it's to train on these abilities. So in general, this is the idea of philosophical practice. And as you can see, as you can think, we can work on workshops based on to train the wonder, or we can make workshops to put ourselves in contact with the transcendental idos by means of eidetic variation. That is a methodology by a German philosopher, Husserl. We can develop workshops to hermeneutical workshops to train our understanding. We can make workshops to promote, for example, solidarity or dialogue based on solidarity, or dialogue based on the creation of our own language, or metaphysics workshops, or workshops for training communitarian dialogues, or aesthetic and ecological workshops. They are workshops in order to develop our aesthetic abilities, or workshops to develop, to put ourselves in contact with nature. And even for philosophical, for our work in prisons, we are very interested in workshops on Stoic training, to develop a Stoic training. I am going to explain now what is it, or workshops to promote communicative action, or even workshops to promote critical thinking. And these are the main philosophical workshops we are developing in prison in Boetio project. So I am going to move now to the project. It is a project that now is funded by the European Union, and it is funded by the Office of International Cooperation here at the University of Spain. And if we go to the past of our project, we can say that it started in 1999 when we started to work in a Ettore group. That was the starting point of my career in philosophical practice. After that, we create a research university group, philosophical practice, subject, suffering, and society, in 2006. After that, in 2014, I create the research university group experientiality or like experience. And the first empirical research project on philosophical practice was created in 2015, and it was funded by the John Templeton Foundation through the University of Chicago. The idea was to know the efficacy of philosophical practice workshops, and it was a project that we developed in 4 countries, in Mexico, Croatia, Norway, and Spain. And it was finished some years ago. And even if you want to see the outcome, the results, you can read this article, Can Wisdom Be Taught by Philosophical Practice, that was published some years ago. After that, or in between, we started to work in some prisons here in Spain. A colleague of mine, Eduardo Vergara, started in 2007 to work in one prison in my city, in Seville. But after some months, he began to work in another parts of our country. And at the end, he was working in 14 prisons here in Spain. He was working for 10 years in Spain, and in 2015, I decided that it could be very interesting to add something to that project. Why? Because that project wasn't a research empirical project. It was a project, a practical project. There were some practical workshops, but the idea was to make the question, those workshops have any efficacy in people? And that was the idea, to create an empirical research project, Boecio project, that is going to prove the efficacy of philosophical workshops in several countries. We started first of all in Mexico, and after that we have moved to another countries, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and so on. Even we developed another project with people of social risk, but this is not the topic of this thing. And as I said, in 2019, we have some fundings by the European Union, in 2019, sorry. And this year, we have more fundings from the Office of International Cooperation. What is the goal of our project? As I said, is to prove the efficacy of philosophical workshops by a rigorous empirical research project with more than 500 inmates. It was difficult because normally a philosopher hasn't got any proficiency in empirical research. And when we started the project in the project that funded the John Templeton Foundation, they said that they are going to give us money if we introduce a specialist in empirical studies. And that was my first contact with empirical studies. After that, I have been studying on this approach to the research. And at the end, we create this project that is a quantitative and qualitative research project. As I said, the idea is with more than 500 inmates. And you can see here the three pillars of our project: critical thinking, to rule over passions, and communicative action. As I said, this is the prisons where we are working now in Spain, at the female prison in Gran Canaria, in the south of Spain, in Mexico, in the prison south, in the prison Sesbo, and in the female prison of Santa Marta, Acatitla. We are going to start in Chihuahua, in several prisons in Chihuahua too. In Brazil, we are working in São Paulo at the prison Serra Azul. In Argentina, we started some months ago at the prison Victoria Entre Rios. And in Colombia, we have permission to enter in the prison of Good Shepherd, but for the moment, we haven't entered there because of the problem with COVID, as you can see. We have another proposal from Turkey, for example, and USA. And even, for example, in Brazil, we have a proposal of 9 prisons in Brazil, but we decided for the moment not enter, because that means a population of 9,000 prisons, now 9,000 inmates. And for the moment, we decided that we want to finish the first part of the project, and the second part, probably, we are going to talk about thousands of inmates. But for the moment, we just want to work between 500 and 1,000 inmates for the moment. This is part of the team. Here you can see part of the team in Colombia. This is the team, part of the team in Argentina. This is the coordinator in Mexico, the Professor Ángel Alonso from the University, from the UNAM in Mexico. This is the coordinator of the team in Brazil. These are some techniques, some technician educators, some that are working with us in Mexico. This is the person who is working with us in Spain. So this is part of our team in several countries. I think that it could be interesting what we are doing in a session. More or less, this is the structure of a session. More or less, no, this is the structure of a section, because we have to respect a procedure, a serious procedure in all the sessions. So we spend 90 minutes, sorry, First of all, we have more or less 15, 20 minutes of reading, and we ask the inmates how was the weekly training. I mean, all the inmates have to develop some daily, they have to develop daily some exercises for 20 minutes at least. And as I said, at the beginning of the session, we have an open dialogue about how was that, that weekly training and what were the difficulties and the like. After that, for 30 minutes, more or less, we develop a practical activity with them. I am going to explain after that what is a practical activity there. After that, we have more or less 15 minutes to explore in a dialogical way the theory of that practice. As you can see, the theory is just 15 minutes because, as I said, what we want to work, to carry out is a practical workshop. So we have, as I said, 15 minutes more or less to some explication. And at the end, we have more or less 10 minutes to propose the activity of the week. And some finish last comments, and in some occasion, we have some time with them in order to talk to the group or to talk to some of the participants in order we can know personally how they are internalizing their practice. And sorry, when I said that we have a practical activity, first of all, I make the practical activity, but if we have time, we propose that the participant move to the role of the teacher. Why? Because the idea of Boesio project is to be viral. What do I mean by viral? That we have some inmates that move from students, so to say, to teachers, to professors. So, for example, in Brazil, and now some of our professor teachers, as you can say, technicians, are the inmates. And I think that this is the important point here, because we don't need philosophers to make these workshops. We make that the people that are developing the workshops have a good and rigorous philosophical study or something like that, formation, some kind of training, but they don't need to have the career of philosophy. So in this sense, we, as I said, in some of our prisons, some of our sessions are being developed now by some prisoners, by some inmates. Sessions. What do we do? The project lasts for 22 weekly sessions. It is more or less a semester, maybe in some occasion a little more. The topics of the sessions are the first and the second one is an introduction, where we explore what means to be a wise person and what do you need to be one of them, and we propose an exercise in order they start to introduce in this idea. After that, we have a big section of about 15, 16 workshops that work on training resilience, more or less, on training to rule over our passions. That is a concept of Stoicism. And we make Stoic exercises. For example, diacrisis. What means diacrisis? It's an exercise to distinguish what depends on me and what it doesn't depend on me. Or for example, prosoche, that is more or less, it is not the same, but it is more or less mindfulness, or as I said, deep perception. We work with cosmic perception, that is to see the reality and keep problem in perspective. We work with premeditation, that is a workshop to imagine that we live a bad situation, for example, that our father has died, in order to prevent its passional consequences when it is real in the future. We have several exercises, as I said, based on Stoicism. And this is the second section of our meetings in the project. And the third one is critical thinking. So we develop some practical sessions where we work on conceptualization, to create good definition, to create hypotheses, to create and assess arguments, to create and assess criteria to assess manipulative language and to discover fallacies. So these are mainly the first section of our work. So, for example, one session, what do we do in this practical exercise? I am going to make a brief resume summary of the section of one of the session of Prosoque. Prosoque was deep sight. Okay. The goal of the section is to open our perception to perceive what we cannot do normally. So we can develop a more profound section. And what we did, a practical exercise where I propose to the people that they stare, they look to a focal point. For example, the focus of your webcam could be, or a door, or what they are. And little by little, I propose that they be conscious, they be aware of what is on the top of that focal point without losing their focal point. After that, we are going to be aware of the bottom of the framework of the site. After that, the left, and after that, the right. And then I propose that they try to have the whole picture, because normally when we look, we normally are aware of our focal point, of one point, but in the framework of our site, we can see more things than that focal point. So the idea is to open your site. After this practical exercise, we can make the same with the smell, with the taste, and we can work with a flower, with a pie, with a piece of food, in order that people, that participants, start to open their sense, their smell, their taste, in order they can explore, so to say, the top, the bottom, the right, the left of their sense. So they start to open up their own sense. So they are improving their ability to be more focused and more open to the site and the other one. And at the end of the exercise, we propose the same. Sorry, this is in Spanish, but I am going to translate. At the end, we propose this thing to the thinking, to the thought. So we propose a participant that they say a basic sentence in his life. For example, the education is good for growing up. Imagine that I asked to a person who is studying at the university, and I said, what is the most important for you? And he said, the education is good for growing up. Okay, what are we going after that? The same that in the previous exercise, but with ideas. So we start to explore this idea, education is good to grow up, by means of, for example, fonts. And we are going to ask this person, how do you know that education is good for growing up? And he can say, because because my teachers said that it was very important. Okay, and we are going to write down here that teachers is one of the fonts of this idea. Or he can say, because for me education is good for growing up because that was my personal experience when I was at school or at college. And we are going to write down, okay, second font is personal experience. So here at the right, we are going to develop, to open up this idea, education is good for growing up, with the criteria of fonts. We can create, for example, at the bottom, another criteria that is for who. For who is education good for growing up? And we can ask for, and he's going to say normally for person, or for example, for children. And we are going to ask to him, What about institution? Education is good to grow up for institution, or what about animals? Education is good for growing up in the case of animals, and little by little, we are going to open up their thought in the same way that we did with the watch, with the sight in Prosoque, in the same thing, in the same way that we did with taste or we smelled, okay? And after that, we expose the theory in the session, what means Prosoque, what is the definition, some example, what could be the goals of Prosoque, what are the groundings, how to develop Prosoque, what are the types of Prosoque, several issues, as I said, that is the next section. And at the end, we propose an exercise. For example, you have to make Prosoque with a friend, and you have to ask to him what is the basic sentence in his life. Or you can practice Prosoque just by observing, by watching one of your friends, of your colleagues, and you have to, first of all, focus on your colleague, and after that, you have to look deep that person according to several criteria that you are going to develop. So he's going to make this exercise during the week for on his one, on her one, and he has to write down that thing in a diary, because this is the one of the main tools that we work on it. This is my own diary, because I have to say that the teachers of the sessions, the technicians, have to work with the students. I mean, if I propose an exercise, it is not just an exercise for them. It is an exercise for the students, and it is an exercise for the professor, for the teacher. So, for example, this is my personal journal, for example, of an exercise of June of this year. And here you can see one of the results of one of the exercises that I was in one of the procedures that we did in Boesio project. I have more or less 10 minutes. I'm going to move away. 10, a little more, 15 minutes. So you have now, I have explained now what is philosophical practice, in general, what is Boesio project, sorry, how we can develop a session, how we carry out a session, and now we can talk about what are the 3 pillars of philosophical practice. First one, critical thinking. What means critical thinking? I said that it is to explore and to train about arguments, to distinguish arguments to description or opinions, to work on language, to work on fallacies, on criteria, but critical thinking is more than that. Critical thinking is to help inmates to discover ideologies by means they are living in. I mean, we are living some clothes because we live in some framework, in some ideologies, and that make that we are wearing some clothes that are very different from people that live, for example, five centuries ago. And this is part of our ideology. We normally drink Coke or wine because we belong or we are inside some ideologies. But our feelings depends of those ideologies. The way we behave depends of those ideologies. The point is that normally we are not aware, we are not conscious of those ideologies. And the problem is that can control ourselves, can manipulate ourselves. So for us in prison, it is important that inmates, detainees know what are the ideologies by means they are living. And the ideology means, for example, that if you see this picture and I ask for you, what feeling do you have when you see this picture? It is very strange that some of you say happiness. Normally is something like sadness or something like that. But why do we feel sadness or nostalgia or something like that when we see this picture, because there is some sensology, some ideology, some structure in our society that makes that we feel sadness after seeing this image. But there are more important things in critical thinking, that is to help inmates how do structures determine their way of living. For example, why do we have water clothes for men and women? Why, what is the position of men and women in a living room? What do we have? What do we have that position? What is the reason that the position or even the share of a professor and a student is different? All of this is part of a structure that is making, that is building our relationships. So the idea is to help the inmates to know how structure determine their way of living. Why? Because, first of all, because of manipulation. In prisons, criminal ideology can manipulate by means of some ideas. For example, the idea that to kill is to be brave. Some people, when we said to an inmate that if he is not going to kill a person, he is like a CC, an homosexual, he feels very bad. But the question is, why some people feel bad in prison if he is calling as homosexual or CC? Why? Because there is an ideology that says that to be CC, to be homosexual is not good. The point is that some people can use that ideology to manipulate another people. And this is where the problem starts in some occasion. And the idea is, if we train people to discover how ideology is manipulating them, we are going to help them to be free of those ideologies. Or even to prevent, for example, social exclusion and self-exclusion. For us, it is very sad that some inmates are excluded of society, but they think that they cannot do something because they are just inmates. And they think that what can I do if I am just an inmate? And they feel that they are a bad person, they are less person, they are more smaller than the people that are outside of prison. And this is very important because in some occasion, the big enemy for inmates are themselves. So the point is that to destroy that ideology, for example, that put in contact inmates with bad people or the like. I am not saying that people in prison are not have not committed some crime or the like, but the point is when we put in contact an inmate with something that is in prison. Why? Because, for example, in Latin America, there are some situations where there are people in prison that are not a convict of the society, but because of economical situation, they are in prisons. And if you have money, maybe you are going to be out of prison. And critical thinking is useful too, for example, to improve problem solving. So why do we need to train to rule over passion? First, in prisons. First of all, because more than 80% of male inmates have been convicted for violent acts, such as violation, violent robbery, murder, and the like. So if you can rule over passions, if you can control, I don't like the word control, but if you can be own your passion, if you can be the king of your passions, you are going to be the king of your violent situation, and you are going to be owner of your life. So it is very important that they develop this ability to rule over their passion, over their emotions. In addition, there are a lot of, you know, that there are a lot of violence inside prison, and you have to learn how to defend yourself. They in some occasion they cannot accept, well, in a lot of occasions they cannot accept another truth because the macho system says that this is a weakness. So in some occasion, violence is a way of control themselves. Another important thing is that a lot of women in Mexico have been convicted because they felt in love with their fiancés and they made, for example, kidnapped, but because their fiancé, their boyfriends, asked for them to do it. The problem is that they were so, they loved so much their boyfriends that at the end, they do what they didn't want it to do. And at the end of the day, the problem is that they didn't rule over the passion. If they rule over their passions, they will be free from this situation, and maybe a lot of them weren't in the prisons. And at least a lot of people in prison are in prison because they need to have more and more things, and this is part of capitalism. And why this is part of capitalism? Because our capitalism makes that we need more and more things, and we don't have another values, and capitalism creates some needs in ourselves. So the idea is that if we can help people to rule over their passions, they are going to be free of these needs created by capitalism. And we developed several workshops. I have talked about it, Diacrisis, Premeditatio Malorum, Prosoche, Meletai, to work on this point. And the third pillar of our workshops is communicative actions. Why? Because a lot of inmates have developed survival skills. Even we can talk about the clinic strategy. I mean, inmates conceptualize people as disposable tissues for their interests, but they don't have a normal relationship with people. And when I said normal, I mean a friendly relationship. So for them, relationship is a way to know what can I get to the other people, so that don't we need to help these people to develop another kind of relationship with the other people. This is the focus of this third pillar of our project. In addition, as you can think, there are a lot of social breaks in prison according to groups based on ethnic reason. There are Black people against white people. There are Islamic people against Catholic people. There are Latin American people against European people. So there are a lot of social breaks. It is important to develop this communication because to live in prison is like to live in Big Brother, in the TV show Big Brother. And you can think what happened in Big Brother after living for some months in a closed place. So imagine what is the situation when you have to live for 10, 20 years with some people. There are some problems in the communication with one another. There are a lot of people with childish personality or psychology. In some occasions, they have to accept their roommates. And imagine our situation. If we have a roommate, we can choose our roommate. And if we dislike this roommate, we are going to move to another flat, to another house. But the problem is, imagine that you cannot choose your own roommate and you have to live with him, with her for some months, years, and this creates some breaks. And even we can talk about the violent situation daily that they have to face. So in some situation, the social breaks in prisons is normal because they are living all days this violent situation in their living. We train by several workshops based on some ideas of philosophers like Habermas, Martin Buber, Nedoncel. I'm not going to talk about it, but the idea is that they create connection between one another. So I am going to finish in more or less 5 minutes. I am going to try to do it. Outcomes, okay? Outcomes now. We are working with two groups, experimental and control group. What is the difference? The difference is that the experimental group is the philosophical group. In the experimental group, we have developed philosophical workshops. And in the control group, we haven't not developed philosophical workshops. So if we compare the results of the experimental, the philosophical groups, and the control, the non-philosophical group, you can see here that, for example, there is an improvement of 15% in the emotional regulation in the philosophical group. In the other group, the group that hasn't studied work with philosophy, there is a decrease of 2.1 in emotional regulation. Openness, open your mind. The idea of open your mind in the experimental group, the philosophical group, there is an improvement of 40%. And in the control group, the group that has not worked with philosophy, there is an improvement of just 2.6. And at the end, the humor, and you can see what humor here in philosophy. Why humor? Humor is very important because if you face your problem with humor, you are going to face your problem in a more open way. And even there are some philosophers, Seneca, for example, Seneca, talk that if you want to decrease your anger, it is important that you face your life with humor. Let's see this point, humor. There is an increase in the philosophical group of 23.4%. And in the control group, the non-philosophical group, there is an increase of just 4.3%. So here we have more or less 20% better situation that in the philosophical control group. Qualitative results. We have discovered a reduction of drug abuse, a drop in solitary confinement, a decrease of suicide. Some inmates started to talk to their relative after years rejecting to talk to them. There are a more sympathetic attitude of participants to the colleague and even to security staff. Some of them said, how do you did this situation? Even in Brazil, there is something very interesting in Brazil, because when we started in Brazil, some people of the security staff said, okay, you can do your philosophical workshops with our inmates, because they are going to have two dooms, two bad situations. They have to be in prison for 20 years, but the worst is that now they have to study philosophy. That was what they said. It's bad for them to study philosophy. After four months, we have a meeting with the security staff, and they said, what are you doing with the inmates? I don't know what are you doing, but we want to be in your workshops because there is a transformation with the people you are working on. So for us, what was very interesting that they moved from a negative perception of philosophy to a positive perception of philosophy, even in Brazil, that we have some problems with philosophy in general. Okay, more outcomes. Participants show rejection to violence against other inmates. And as I said, some security staff want some workshops, some philosophical workshops with them. We have another projects. For example, we are working with this project with families at social risk. We are going to open, as I said, a postgrad on philosophical practice with people at social risk in Brazil, another course and university course in Colombia, here in Spain, and even we are opening now a center, the Center Boesio, for philosophical practice a center of philosophical practice for people at social risk. We are going to open it. We are finishing the website now. And if you want more information, even you have here a book that in English, and here you can see more information about what is philosophical practice, what are we doing in prisons and the like. So let me finish with a quotation by Theodor Adorno. He said in Education for Emancipation the following thing: whether or not one is an intellectual, is something that manifests itself about all in the relationship he maintains with his work and with the social whole of which he is a part. This relationship, the relationship with society, and not dealing with specialized fields such as epistemology, ethics, and the history of philosophy itself, is what constitutes the essence of philosophy. For us, for philosophical practitioners, this is very important, because for us, the main thing in philosophy is not just to put in contact with ethics or the like. It is important to put in contact with the people and to develop with them real philosophy, and this is what we are doing in philosophical practice. So this is all I wanted to explain what is philosophical practice. We talk a little about our project, how we carry out the session, what are the 3 pillars: critical thinking, rule over passion, communicative action, and we finish about what are we doing, working with families, working with children at poor neighborhoods, and even to create the Center Boecio, that is a center of philosophical practice for people at social risk. As I said, now is your turn. You can make some question now, or even write me down by email and social networks. But now it is your turn.
Thank you so much, Pepe. Very interesting lecture and the study you have done. So we open up for questions then. Does anyone have a question?
Or comments or proposals? Because for us, it is very interesting to have new ideas. For example, the 3rd pillar was an idea in Boecio project. To work with security staff was an idea in Mexico. Some people said you have to work with security staff. To work with families of inmates was an idea of people, because European prisons are different from prisons in Latin America. And they said the problem in some occasions is families, or is security staff, because they are not so good, so to say, they are not so legal, so to say, than in Europe. So comments or proposals could be very interesting for us.
I'm a bit curious. You said that you worked in a female prison in Spain, but I guess you have also worked with groups with males as well. Are there any difference in the outcome of having a group of females or males, or is it quite the same, or what would you say?
One of the challenge of our project was to work in female prisons, and the challenge is because there are just a few prisons in the countries, because normally 80% of prisoners, of inmates, are male prisoners, and normally 20% or less are female prisons. For example, here in Spain, we have 84 prisons, and we just have 4 prisons for females. The first difference between one and the other is the situation of men and women in prisons. Why? First of all, imagine Spain, 84 or 80 prisons for men and 4 prisons for female. Imagine that you make a crime in your city and you are a man. Normally, you are going to a prison in your own city. If you are a woman, it is very difficult that you are going to be in your own city. And you can say, okay, but there isn't any problem. There is a lot of problem. Why? Because normally your family is not going to visit you so frequently if you are men or women. Why? Because your family normally don't have any money to travel all the weeks or to travel all months. So the situation with with women is very difficult. In some occasions, there are some sections for women in some male prisons. This is better than the other situation, but it's not good enough because all the services are linked for men. So you are going to have some problems with that situation. In addition, the situation of the ideology of men and women in prison. Normally, if you are a man in a prison, you are considered a brave man. You are considered a more man because you are violent and you are more stronger. But the ideology of female prison is very bad because they are looked as crazy person. The ideology of the female normally in Latin America is a person who has to be with his husband. In Latin America, in Europe, is a little different. So if you commit a crime, you are going to be you are going to have problem with society and even with your family. And here is information. Normally, 80% of male prisoners, of men in prison, 80% are visited. But in the case of women, I don't know if you can imagine what is the percent. Proposal? No?
Tom suggested 0.
No, not so much, but 15%. 15%. The point is that normally, in a lot of occasions, even your father or your mother don't want to see you because you have two bad pictures of you. You have committed a crime, but you have been a bad daughter. If you are a man, there isn't any problem because it's normal because you are a man. But if you are a daughter, you have committed so this is another situation. But answering your question, is there any difference between men and women? In some occasions, we have discovered that there are more women that move from the workshops to make a career in philosophy. Some of our women move to make some situation. Second, I am talking about Latin American prisons. And this is very important because the situation, the relation between European and Latin American prisoners is very different. So in the case of women, normally they have developed more aesthetic abilities. And that means that they think in another way. They are not so logic normally. They develop more what in philosophy for children, we talk about care thinking. So they care more about the other person. But the point is, they care inside their own group. If they are violent, women could be more violent inside prison than men. They don't commit so many crimes, but in some occasions we have seen more violent situation. And with figures, I cannot say that there are differences for the moment. We don't have all the figures, but in general, it's more the difference between, for example, people from indigenous communities and Europeans than, for example, between women and men, or between people from Colombia, Mexico, Latin America, and inmates from Europe. There are more different in that sense that between women and women, but the situation is very different, and normally is worst in the case of female.
Thank you for your answer, Pepe. And I just want to check with you, Tom. We are actually 1 minute behind now, but we have one more question from Malin. Is it okay to stay on and take that one, or should we answer it in the chat? Now we go on with Malin. Yes, so please, Malin.
Okay, first, thank you. It's very interesting and it feels like we could keep on for at least 1 hour more.
Mm.
I'm very grateful to hear you and hear what you're doing. I was just wondering who are holding the workshops in the prisons? What persons are leading or facilitating it? I didn't get
Okay. What are the leading the professor of the workshops? No? Is that the question? Who is the
who is
professor?
Facilitating?
Okay, okay. Thank you very much for your question, and I love your start, your Christmas start after you. And normally we start with a team of philosophers and people that have studied at the university. I mean, our first team, for example, in Colombia, we are working with people who have a career bachelor in philosophy, but we are working with people that have a bachelor in law, or people who are social workers, or people who have studied education. So we develop a training of several months of that idea. And for us, it is very important, more than the career, if they have any experience in prison. Because to develop a workshop outside of prison, it is not so risky like in prison. So for us, it is important if they have developed some kind of activity in prison, more than the career. However, normally, most of them have studied philosophy. Why? Because I am a philosopher and I know more people in philosophy. But as I have said, in some occasion, for example, the coordinator in Argentina, Claudia Perlo, she's not philosopher, she's anthropologist. In other occasions, some of the facilitators are educators, teachers from the prisons. So normally we start with this person. The second generation or the third generation integrates normally some people who live in prison, not to live, a person who is inmate, a detainee. So all the generation have 1, 2, 3 persons that are very good in the workshops, and they or we propose that we start another group, and normally they make the session with us, and little by little the idea is that they are autonomous to develop these sessions. And I think that this is very important. We are ongoing in this idea because of COVID, but imagine that we have another COVID, another pandemic. I hope no. I hope so that we don't have another one. But our problem now, our problem with COVID was that all prisons were closed. Now we have some of them open, but we have some prisons that are developing some of the workshops. Why? Because some of our technicians, our facilitators are inmates. So the second generation, the third generation is to work with inmates. And even, and I am going to finish, even we have an experience in Brazil again, because 2 of our participants moved to another prisons. And after some months, we received a phone call of the director of a prison, because he wanted to talk to us. And his idea was to move Boecio to his prison. And we asked to him, and how do you know that Boecio exists? And he said, because we have 2 of your students, they started to talk to their colleagues about the benefits of Boecio project, and they have proposed to open some sessions in our prison. So the idea is to make it viral. It is a philosophical project, but the idea is that Boecio belong to philosophers. It's a project to be spread out by all the persons, and that's the idea, because we are discovering the benefits of this project. So answering, first of all, philosopher, second, people from another career, and third, inmates, male and female inmates.
Thank you. Okay, and I cannot see any questions in the chat, so we are 7 minutes past, so then we unfortunately need to close the meeting. But thank you so much, Peppe, and please, for you other participants, visit our website if you are interested to join more other sessions in other topics as well. And also soon it's Christmas time, so Merry Christmas all of you, and have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. I have write down my email. If you have another question, yes, or even proposals to work in prison or outside of prisons or the like, I will very interesting, because the idea is to try to work with people at social risk. So thank you very much for your attendance, for participating, for being here, for your questions, and to make possible to join our countries by this lecture. Thank you.